Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of a bunch of book recommendations that are inspired by Stormlight Archive and more specifically by Bridge 4. My friend Sophia from Sophia's Thoughts is hosting a readathon. She has myself and a few other people as co-hosts, the other individuals being Stephanie, Joanna, and Jessie, and I'll have all of their channels linked so you can check them out as well. Sophia is the main host of the readathon, and the readathon will take place from May 16th through June 12th. The reason being that she knows a lot of people structure their TBRs around a given month, so she wants people to be able to kind of put some things from one TBR on the readathon, so there's some overlapping, and then same thing for June, so it doesn't take up your entire TBR for a month. It's also just going to be very casual, very fun. You can overlap a lot of the prompts, and the prompts are specifically centered around the members of Bridge 4. I do want to say really quick, if you clicked on this video hoping it would be one of those, if you like Stormlight Archive, check out these books. Obviously, that's not what this is, but I have done one of those videos in the past, so I'll have that linked. But if you are looking for certain prompts for this readathon, if you'd like to participate, one, I'll have Sophia's video linked so that you can get all the information on the readathon itself, and then also get some more details about any individual prompt. I will mention, of course, the prompts as I'm going through the recommendations, but Sophia goes a little bit more in-depth, so definitely check out her channel, definitely check out that video. But I'm just gonna jump right into it because I obviously have so many books to mention, and on top of that, I have more books next to me on the floor. The very first prompt is centered around Kaladin, and it's to read a book with a reluctant hero. You don't have to stick to fantasy. You can also choose books from other genres as well. You can also pick up graphic novels, manga, those sorts of things. So I tried to have some variety in all of these recommendations. And for the reluctant hero one, I have 3 different recommendations. I have Legend by Marie Lu, Red Rising by Pierce Brown, and then Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. So all a little bit different. And these ones are some more popular books that I'll be recommending. There will be some underhyped and underrated books mentioned as well. Legend by Marie Lu follows the far future America. We follow 2 main perspectives, Day and June. And the reluctant hero, I would say, is more so with Day. He has kind of accidentally become a hero of the people because he is somebody who represents the poor. He represents people that are definitely oppressed in this society. And in trying to do what he can to undermine some of the Republic's efforts, he does end up kind of gaining a reputation. And all he really wants to do is protect his family. He does want to do what he believes is right. And for a lot of it, he doesn't quite want to make a big deal of what he's doing. It just sort of becomes a big deal anyway. Legend is a YA story. Red Rising is adult, although some people feel that certain aspects of it are very young adult. So this one is kind of one of those, if you're intimidated by adult science fiction fantasy, this would be a good one to pick up. But this is almost the epitome of a reluctant hero because our main character, Darrow, wants absolutely nothing to do with leading a revolution, trying to free his people from oppression. He knows that they are oppressed, but he sort of doesn't feel like there's anything he can do about it, and he just wants to make the life that he has the best it can possibly be, but circumstances don't really allow for that, and he does reluctantly end up having to try and take down the entire caste system. Under the Whispering Door I wanted to include as well because while it's not maybe your traditional reluctant hero, that's part of why I wanted to include it. Sophia details in her video that it's okay to maybe sometimes take things that you wouldn't expect. And this one follows a man who has died, and then he is caught in this in-between life and death. And throughout the story, all he really wants to do is find a way to be alive again. He absolutely hates that he's died, and he's starting to see what it takes to help people pass on peacefully, and then you see him starting to become a better person because in life he wasn't really very kind, very generous, he was very self-centered, and so you see him sort of reluctantly starting to become a better person. The next individual that we are focusing on would be Sil, and the prompt for this one is some kind of companion. And this can be another person, it doesn't have to be an animal companion, although you can do animal, you can do mythological creature, you can also do an object that has some form of sentience, but I'm going to be mentioning Crown of Feathers, The Bone Shard Daughter, and 6 Crimson Cranes because I just feel the companion element to this is very, very strong. 6 Crimson Cranes, you find our main character has been cursed and she cannot speak, and if she does, her brothers will die, and her brothers have currently been turned into cranes. And she ends up discovering a little bit of things that she's capable of throughout the story. One of the things that you see is that she has a little companion that she has sort of created, but it definitely has its own personality. And there's a reason I've said before that Even though it's called 6 Crimson Cranes, I know it looks like there's 7, but this one on the bottom is not one of the cranes. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about the companion. It's very cute. It's very precious, which is true of just basically this whole book. Crown of Feathers follows 2 sisters who want to get back into their homeland, and to do this, they are hoping that maybe they can build a connection with a phoenix. And one character has this really sort of hopeful and sweet personality, and then her older sister is very cruel and is often sort of very negatively impacting the younger sister, and the younger sister tries to escape that while also trying to persevere to find this animal companion. And also in doing this, she ends up finding a group of rebellious phoenix riders. The Bone Shard daughter is adult and it is very confusing for a while. You don't quite know how the magic system works, but you're getting hints and pieces of it throughout the beginning of the story, and you're trying to puzzle it all together, and it's sort of a blend of different genres. I've spoken very highly of this one a number of times, so I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, but we follow a few perspectives. The 2 main ones would be the daughter of the Emperor, who is trying to regain her memories that she has lost so that she can tap back into what she needs to know to use magic. And then the other character is somebody who is a smuggler. He is trying to do what he can to find his missing wife, and in doing this, he ends up finding this little creature that looks kind of like an otter, kind of like a cat. He doesn't really know what it is, but he's like, whatever, it can tag along, I guess. And then that little creature starts to grow and starts to have a personality and just hangs out with him all the time. And it is the cutest. After that, we have Teft, and the reading prompt for this one is a mentor figure. And so I have picked 3 books for this one. We have Queen of Blood, Scythe, and Witcher. I actually did a whole video of some of my favorite mentor relationships, so I'm going to have that video linked if maybe that's a trope that you really love, if you want to see more recommendations for that one. Witcher, I absolutely love the relationship between Geralt and Ciri. This has become so popular, I probably don't need to say a whole lot about it, but if you don't know anything, we follow a man named Geralt, and he is a witcher, which is a monster hunter. But monster hunters, despite the fact that they save people, they also have to charge for their services, and thus are seen as these monstrous people in and of themselves, because who would dare charge somebody to do something that would save their life is kind of how people look at them. But witchers just try to keep to themselves, stay out of politics, they're just trying to do their job, they're just trying to get by, and Geralt ends up having all of that flipped upside down when he meets a young girl named Ciri. Scythe is a dystopian story that on the surface, it seems like it is a utopia because mankind has conquered death, with the exception of the threat of overpopulation. They have tried space exploration and it has failed, and so now they are trying to figure out a way to deal with overpopulation since nobody naturally dies anymore. And so their solution to this is to create a group of people called Scythes who, when they kill somebody, it is permanent. And this story follows these 2 characters, Rowan and Citra, and they are 2 individuals that don't have any desires to become scythes, but they are selected by a man named Scythe Faraday, who decides that these 2 are the ones that he is going to have as his apprentices. Queen of Blood, I have mentioned many a time for having an absolutely fantastic setting. We follow a society that lives within a forest, but there are these beings known as spirits, and the spirits are what allow the forest to function. However, spirits have this instinct to protect the forest, and because humans, in living within it, end up harming it, they then perceive that as a threat that needs to be taken care of, and so spirits try to attack humans. The only way to keep spirits from killing basically everyone is to find this one magic user among women who is powerful enough to hold the spirits in check. After that, we have a prompt for Rock, and that would be a book that features food. And Sophia did make it clear that it doesn't need to be centered around food. Basically, any book where somebody eats or there's a description of food counts, but I still wanted to mention some books where I think food definitely comes up a lot more. One of them is a romance story called Sweet Hand, and this is a story that's kind of an enemies to lovers setup. We follow a girl who is a baker, and she's kind of known in the celebrity circles because she was actually on this reality baking show, and so very much a lot of the book gets descriptions of food, very delicious sounding food, I might add. The other one is kind of marketed as fantasy romance, although after having read it, I would say this first book doesn't have quite that much romance, but Kingdom of the Wicked is a story that follows a witch. She lives in Sicily, and her family run a restaurant, And witches are not known to most of mankind. They have to keep their identities a secret. But then something happens to somebody our main character cares about. It turns sort of into a murder mystery. And in a desperate attempt for our main character to figure out who murdered the person they care about, they end up calling upon wrath. The next prompt is centered around the Lopen. I think it's funny that Sophia specifically put the Lopen, but the prompt for this one is to mention a book that has physical disability rep, specifically physical for this prompt because there is another one that deals with neurodivergence and mental health. So for this one, I am going to recommend Sky Hunter by Marie Lu, Age of Assassins by R.J. Barker, and Get a Life, Chloe Brown. So Get a Life, Chloe Brown is a very popular romance story that follows a girl who has chronic pain. And she is just trying to get by in life, and then she meets a man who is responsible. He's like the handyman of the apartment complex she lives in. She thinks this guy hates her, so it's a little bit enemies to lovers as well. The other two, Sky Hunter and Age of Assassins, this one is sci-fi, this one is fantasy. This one also is great for the mentor trope, but I wanted to mention it specifically for this one because we follow a character who is the apprentice to an assassin, and this main character, Gurton, actually has a physical disability where he has a clubbed foot. And the plot for this one is essentially his mentor has been assigned to track down another assassin. And while that sounds like it'd be very action-packed, it's actually kind of more of a coming-of-age story with some political intrigue going on in the background. Sky Hunter is kind of like a zombie story. We follow a society where they are kind of the last group of people that have been holding out against this one, I'm going to call it an empire. And they have to fight against these what are kind of like zombies that the Empire has learned to control. These zombies have incredible hearing abilities, and our main character and a lot of the other characters actually use sign language to communicate, but our main character themselves actually doesn't speak, and so sign language is their main means of communication throughout the entire story. Next up, we have Moash, and the theme for this one is a revenge story. So there are so many revenge stories out there. I'm going to specifically recommend Vinland Saga just because I think it does the revenge story basically better than anything else. It is so good. We follow a young man named Thorfinn. His father used to be a Viking and he kind of walked away from that life, but that life is not done with him. And so you see Thorfinn's father getting caught back into this, and Thorfinn ends up wanting revenge against the people that pull his father back into this. And in doing it, Thorfinn kind of ends up around the very people and the very things that he used to despise. And it's actually an incredibly heartbreaking story. If you're somebody who loves anything to do with Vikings, check out Vinland Saga. There's also an anime adaptation, and it's great. Next up, we have Skar, and the specific prompt to go along with Skar would be some kind of training element in the book. So first, I'm going to recommend Rage of Dragons. This is the one that also could have gone in the revenge category, but this one I just think has so much training, and if you are somebody who absolutely loves that in books, then definitely check out Rage of Dragons. It follows a caste system of which our main character is a part of the lower classes, and after something occurs to someone he cares about, he not only wants revenge, but he then needs to train so that he is able to face against those who have wronged the people he cares about. I also wanted to mention the Seven Realms series. The first book, not so much. You're really not going to see any training elements in this first book, but there is a book in this series that has a school setting. And on top of that, one of our main characters is kind of going outside of the school setting to get even more training. Set up for this story in the first book is we have two main perspectives, Han, Alistair, and Reza, and these two main characters are from completely different worlds. Reza is a princess. She's very flippant and carefree in the first book, and then Han is kind of a street thief type of character. And the way that their stories intertwine throughout the quartet, I think it's done really well. I like the character arcs that we see across these four books. In general, really like this series, and I do think the training aspect of it is very satisfying. After that, we have Sigzil, and this would be a retelling. There are so many retellings out there, I almost didn't even feel like I should mention anything, but I'll go ahead and mention a few. We have A Curse So Dark and Lonely. This is another one that you can use to overlap because our main character does have a physical disability, but most of you have heard of A Curse So Dark and Lonely. It is a modern day Beauty and the Beast retelling and a portal fantasy. So our main character is living in our day, and she ends up getting forced into this fantasy land where this young man, every season, if a woman does not fall in love with him, then he turns into a beast and then he goes on a killing rampage. He would very much like this to end, and thus that's where our main character Harper comes into the picture. I also wanted to mention a new release, The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. This story follows a girl who was not meant to be sacrificed to a sea god, but after seeing how much her brother loves the person who is supposed to be sacrificed, our main character sacrifices herself. The sea god is definitely causing a lot of issues on land to the people through hurricanes, natural disasters, too much rain, the seas are too raging, and so our main character is hoping that in sacrificing herself, she can finally change whatever is causing the sea god to be so upset. This next book, I have not had a chance to talk about it thoroughly on my channel, but it is a retelling and it is extremely graphic. You probably want to look a little bit more into it before you pick it up, but that would be Guild. It is a King Midas retelling, which is not a figure I typically see done in retellings, which is why I kind of wanted to mention it. So the way I'm going to describe this is, imagine if A Court of Thorns and Roses / A Court of Mist and Fury was very dark. Very dark. Very graphic. I really feel the need to highlight that. But yes, if that sounds like something that you would be, if your interest is piqued, then, you know, check this one out. If you do pick it up, I would say give the first 2 a go, because the first one's very short and kind of meandering, and I would say you're going to get more of the plot if you read the first 2. Next up, we have Dabbed, and this is where you pick up a book that either has some kind of emphasis on neurodivergence or mental health. And the reason I say both those things is because sometimes with neurodivergence, some aspects of mental health fall under that, but not always, and Sophia has said that you can include things like anxiety and depression in that, which is obviously more mental health. With neurodivergence, more like things with autism, ADHD, and things like that. So I wanted to mention a couple different ones. For those of you that have never picked up Percy Jackson and would really like to, this is the perfect time to do so. It's a middle grade story that follows demigods, and a lot of them have dyslexia. I also wanted to mention Vespertine. The main character in this story is definitely somebody who perceives social cues very differently than most other characters that you see as main characters in stories. And I will say there are elements to this main character that clearly in her past she has had something very traumatic happen to her, but even then I still think that the way that she processes things is not what you tend to see from other characters, and I would say I think that she falls under the neurodivergent kind of character. The setup for this story is our main character is someone working for this group of nuns, essentially, and she is learning how to keep spirits from harming those who are still alive, and at one point she ends up having to have kind of this relic spirit come into her so that she can have enough power to protect people. But now that spirit is with her, and it's kind of in her head all the time, and she has to tap into it sometimes to gain power, but she can't let it overtake her because then the spirit will likely harm people. And I just think that that makes for a very interesting kind of story to have this character always have something in her head. The last book I'll mention for this category would be A Song of Wraiths and Ruin. One of the characters has extreme anxiety, and the way that the author handles that in the story I think is really well done. There's actually a moment that is very heroic, and it's sort of rooted in the strength it takes to have that sort of thing constantly as a part of your life. The 2 main characters of this one are pitted against each other because in order to try and help those they care about and access magic that would allow them to help those they care about, they end up having to harm someone else, and the person that would fulfill the requirements of who they're supposed to harm happen to be each other. After that, we have the character Leyton, and this one is a second chance read. And so I'm not actually going to give any specific recommendations because this is all so personal. This is a book that in the past maybe you picked up but you didn't have the chance to finish. Maybe you DNF'd a book and you want to give it another try, something like that. So obviously, whatever that is to you is what I would say for this category. Next, we have the character Drahi, and for this prompt, we have to read a book with LGBTQ rep in it, and so I am going to mention 2 different ones. We have Winter's Orbit and City of Dusk. These are quite different from one another. In City of Dusk, our main characters are all part of these different houses that have different magic based off of which god or goddess they have descended from. And while on one hand they have to work together, a lot of times they are pitted against each other as one of the heirs of the houses is going to be chosen to be the next ruler. But within this story, a lot of the characters are actually LGBTQ, and it's just something that is accepted in society. A lot of times in fantasy, you see people who are LGBTQ that are mistreated, oppressed in some fashion, and that's not really the case. In this, it's just a part of who some people are. Winter's Orbit is a sci-fi story that is sort of a murder mystery. You follow two characters that could not be more unalike, who are forced to marry each other, and one particular character clearly has some kind of trauma affecting them, and our other character is somebody who is happy-go-lucky, really sweet, really friendly, very outgoing, and they start to learn more about what has happened to their now husband. They're trying to do what they can to be there for them, be kind to them, and I actually think that the relationship within the story is really, really sweet. But the murder mystery is kind of also going on as the thing that propels the plot forward alongside the development of the relationship. Next up, we have Hobber, and the prompt for this one is a humorous read. I'm going to mention two very different stories, but I find both of these very funny. We have First Law by Joe Abercrombie, and then we also have Full Metal Alchemist. I love Full Metal Alchemist. I talk about it basically every time I have the opportunity to, because I just think it's so great. There's so many different characters that are all so entertaining. Their relationships are great. The range of emotions that you feel while reading this is so large. But we follow our two main characters that are brothers, Edward and Alphonse, who tried to save their mother using alchemy, and it failed. And as a result of this failed experiment, Edward lost an arm and a leg, and Alphonse lost his body. His soul had to be attached to a suit of armor. You've probably heard me talk about it so many times, but the humor in it is fantastic, and my husband and I both we can't get over it. We just think it's just delightful. And then First Law, very different kind of humor, but also I think very funny. It's a little bit, I would say, darker, and also taps into a very realistic part of how people think, how they process things, a darker side to all of us that sometimes we can't really show outwardly, but we feel inside. And I feel like Joe Abercrombie captures that very well. If you're wondering what First Law is about, in case you've heard about it but never really picked it up, it is hard to pin down the plot because it feels very plotless for so long. It's very character driven. Take your traditional story for fantasy and then be like, scratch that, I'm going to do the exact opposite. There's no chosen one. These people do not have a ton of agency. They do not have a lot of power over their own lives, and we're going to see what it's like when those characters cross paths. After that, we have Retelling, and this one is to read a book with Indigenous representation, and so I'm going to mention both Firekeeper's Daughter and Alotsuwe. Firekeeper's Daughter is a contemporary story. It follows a girl who is part Native American, and that's part of the thing in the story that she's having to deal with, is being part Native American and never really feeling like she's fully accepted on one part of her family or the other. And on top of that, we see a lot to do with how there's this murder or a series of murders that have been occurring on the reservation, and how on one hand they want this murder solved and they want these series of murders to be solved. They don't want people to continue dying, but the way in which crime is treated on reservations, that's something that the author is really zeroing in on and focusing on. Alotsuwe is also somewhat of a murder mystery. This one I think is a lot less heavy, although there are some heavier topics and themes in this one as well. This one you get to see magic within, which I think the magic is really, really cool. This one can fit within the companion category as well. The next one says side carry, and the idea for this one is to read something that is beneficial to you. This could be maybe picking up a nonfiction book that'll teach you about something, or maybe it'll be a self-help book, or it can be something that you've been meaning to read for so long and now's the chance. So this is another one that I can't really give specific recommendations, but whatever is something that would be beneficial for you to pick up, that's what you should pick up. We also just have a category for Bridge 4, and this one, the prompt is sprint. So you can participate in a sprint that Sophia does. I do sprints over on my Patreon. You can participate in that. You can participate in somebody else's sprints. You can just call up a friend and do a reading sprint with them. If you don't know what a reading sprint is, it's basically where people set aside time to read together. And then you can chat a little bit before, you can chat a little bit after, but that's the idea. It's like a productivity sprint specifically for reading. And at the very end, we have pick up a challenging read, and this is Again, one that is going to be very specific depending on what would be considered challenging to you. This could be something that maybe the writing style is not something that you typically would pick up. Maybe it's a genre that you don't find yourself gravitating towards usually, so that's a little bit of a challenge. Maybe it's a book that's really large. Maybe you don't generally read shorter work, so you should pick up a shorter work for this one. I mentioned this earlier, but I just want to reiterate that you can overlap a lot of these prompts. And Sophia specified too that it's okay to DNF. If you pick up something for a prompt and you just cannot stand the book, it's okay to put it down. You can still count it. She has a little bingo card as well, and she has a bunch of different graphics that you can download if you really want to get into this. The one that she has that details all of the prompts, you can check that one out as well. So all of that information is available via her video. Like I said, I'll have that linked. I'll have links to a bunch of the things that I talked about as well. Whatever is relevant, I'll have in the description bar. If you have your own recommendations for any of these, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. And if you're going to participate, I would love to know if you're going to participate in this readathon. Definitely check out Sophia, Jessie, Stephanie, and Joanna. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.